This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Progressive author Thomas Frank takes on the sacred cow of bipartisanship. He says that all bipartisanship means is that liberals win the culture wars and conservatives cut regulations and social services. He also takes on the mythology about Lincoln. Stay tuned. Former Congressman Tom Perriello of Virginia, however, is a big believer in compromise and believes things might be on the verge of getting a little better on Capitol Hill. And Bill Press talks with Senator Tom Harkin about the minimum wage. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. This is the best of Toms: Tom Frank, Tom Perriello, and Tom Harkin. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Best-selling author and essayist Thomas Frank hates compromise, and he says President Obama's biggest failures result from his loving it. The author of the highly acclaimed What's the Matter with Kansas says bipartisanship is an empty shibboleth and reminds us that winning the Civil War was anything but a compromise. Thomas Frank is a commentator on American politics and culture, a columnist at Harper's Magazine, and author of a book called Pity the Billionaire: The Hard Times Swindle and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. He's also the author of the books What's the Matter with Kansas and The Wrecking Crew: How Conservatives Rule. Tom Frank, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Absolutely.
Now, as a progressive commentator, you've been critical of President Obama from time to time. So overall, how do you think he's doing right now?
Well, he looks pretty good right now, having won re-election pretty triumphantly over Mitt Romney, although I'm not sure how much of the credit goes to President Obama. I mean, obviously he worked hard on the campaign trail, but or was it a case of just the Republican self-destruction? I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse candidate than Mitt Romney. Although maybe, Newt Gingrich might have been worse. But look, so my take on President Obama is, in general, I like the man. He was my state senator when I lived in Chicago years ago, and I was always very impressed by him. He's highly intelligent, kind of frighteningly intelligent. And I think you compare what he did to the European countries, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, and Obama went in the right direction, while the Europeans were going as fast as they could in the wrong direction. So he did the stimulus package, he did universal health care, and these were things that I, obviously was hugely in favor of. But he, in each of these cases, he didn't go far enough. He didn't do. The stimulus should have been much larger. It should have gone on, for years. It shouldn't have just half of it shouldn't have been tax breaks. Universal health care should have been much more comprehensive. They haven't got medical costs under control. There's all of these things. His heart's in the right place, but he hasn't. Whenever you have these sort of key moments, he tends to, he doesn't go far enough. He doesn't press his case. He always gives in. And I think this is largely because he was really in love with the idea of compromise, and this goes way back. If you read his various memoirs, in his search for a grand bargain, this is really what his first term was all about. And I think that led to his greatest mistake, which is he was not enthusiastic or even willing to do what needed to be done to beat the Republicans in Congress, to make Congress a Democratic majority again, and that's going to hurt him.
Well, let me ask you this, and this might fold right in with whether or not he did enough. Would we be in the fiscal mess we're in now if the president had in fact gone bigger on his original stimulus and not yielded on the Bush tax cuts? And would that have actually would we have not seen 2010?
Well, it's an ironic situation, and the answer is, I think, yes. Had he done much more, because look, I'm here in Washington D.C., or I mean the suburbs actually. And the way people think in Washington D.C. is that the answer always lies somewhere in between the two parties. But we were in a peculiar situation in 2009, 2010, where if President Obama had gone much farther in the direction that he was heading, I think it would have been a much more popular move, and I think he would have beaten the Republicans had he not tried so hard to swing back to the center. Ironically, moving back to the center this is always sold in Washington as being very pragmatic, but it was the opposite of pragmatic in this case. It allowed the Republicans to come back. I think had he gone big, as you put it, it would have been massively popular. It would have changed the entire language of politics. Look, we have a historical a template for what we've just been through, and the template is the 1930s. And we know that when Franklin Roosevelt did what he did, the Republicans didn't bounce right back. He kept trouncing them for years and years and years. They didn't recover the House of Representatives until the 1950s, and then it was only for one term. They didn't get it back for good until the 1990s. And that's what could have happened. That's the opportunity that was missed, in my opinion.
We're speaking with Thomas Frank, columnist at Harper's Magazine, author of several books, including Pity the Billionaire, The Hard Times Swindle, and The Unlikely Comeback of the Right. Obviously, there's a tremendous frustration at all levels of society and politics about the inability of Washington to get anything done. Or would you say that you're among those who believe that the fault lies not, say, in the stars, but solely in the Republican Party?
Well, not solely, but let's flip the question around and start from the end. The Republican Party profits from public cynicism about Washington. This is their lifeblood. And when public cynicism about Washington is on the rise, and it has been for a long time, that's who benefits. The Republican Party is who benefits. So, they also, and it's not a surprise, they stoke public cynicism towards Washington. They try to build it up. They try to fan the flames. And so being the party of no and being complete obstructionists and doing all the things that they have done to try to, torpedo. Look, you'd think that the obvious public response when you see, a spectacle like the business with the debt ceiling back in 2011, which, frightened people, was a terrifying moment. You'd think that would sour them on the Republican Party forever, but that's not how people perceive it. They look at this and they say, Washington, they're fighting again. They can't do anything right. And it just builds public cynicism. Until the day that you have, Democratic leadership that is willing to come out and make the case against these guys, make the case against the anti-government position, this kind of thing is going to happen. The Republicans are going to profit by sabotaging the works. And the best evidence for this is the entire course of the Bush administration, where you had this very cynical governance by people who didn't believe in government, and they did a very bad job governing, but that was deliberate. I think there's more evidence comes out all the time. Just today I saw another Inspector General's report came on about all the spending in Iraq, which was just shameful, the billions that were dumped over in that country on nothing, just blown, handed out to contractors. And, and it's not a surprise that the kind of people that do that are the people that really believe government can't do anything right. I mean, these two things go hand in hand. And until you have Democrats that are willing to break this sort of vicious cycle, and say what needs to be said, it's going to go on.
But with the dysfunction that we've got in Washington, and you've got Republicans opposing anything the president says or does, including things they used to want him to do, where do you go? How do you combat that?
Well, one way is to speak about it forthrightly in the manner that I just described. And President Obama is not generally, like I said, he's an intelligent man, and I think he understands what's going on. but he's so far has not been willing to talk about it in these terms. To really, in fact, it's worse than that. When he talks about government, he always makes sure to say, "Oh, and I know government can't solve all our problems." He always makes sure to hedge and to give a nod to the sort of Reagan, Reagan ideology. And in fact, he has described himself as, during the Reagan era, he would have been a moderate Republican. That's how he's described his own political views. And so far, he's just not willing to make the case that needs to be made. But I think that the answer to this thing, the answer to this problem, is for him to fight these guys. I think they can be beaten, and it's not just a matter of waiting for the demographic tables to turn on them. I think he's got to take issue with the whole anti-government philosophy.
Now, in a scathing review of the book and author of Team of Rivals, that's Doris Kearns Goodwin, you suggest that the hoopla about Lincoln may be a false cry for bipartisanship today, but don't we need more working together among political adversaries?
Oh, yeah, wouldn't that be nice? See, this is the thing, is that bipartisanship
we can dream and hope, can't we?
Yeah, that's right. Bipartisanship is the great shibboleth of Washington, D.C. That is the sort of economic foundation of this city. But it's an empty shibboleth. This is what bipartisanship. You think of President Obama and his Democrats in Congress spinning their wheels for months and months and months trying to come up with the health care plan, Obamacare, and the Republicans are sort of leading them along, saying, "Oh yeah, bipartisanship. Oh yeah, well, sure thing," and then not a single one of them voting for it. But it's a shibboleth. It's an empty shibboleth. It always means the same thing in Washington, which is this sort of ideology of the Washington Post, which always comes back to the same thing. We have to cut entitlements. We have to cut entitlements. They always say the same thing. Bipartisanship equals, liberals win on the culture wars, and we go, and then we have more deregulation, and we run down. We cut Social Security or something like that. It always means the same thing. That's all it means. And it also means that they don't have to deal with people whose opinions that they don't want to. So, if you look at sort of consensus opinion in Washington, D.C., what that means, bipartisanship, is we don't have to pay attention to opinions that we don't feel like paying attention to. We know what the right answer is. We know what the right answer is, and we don't have to debate it. That's what it means. So it's not worthy of of a great historian, and it's not worthy even of a Spielberg. But look, and then there's all sorts of other things. Like, if you want to make a movie about the genius of compromise, Abraham Lincoln? Are you serious? This is a period of civil war. That's not compromise. There's, unconditional surrender is what the Union demanded. It's not the spirit of compromise. It's totally wrong. They found a small thing in Lincoln's career, the passage of the 13th Amendment to focus on. But, if you really wanted to make a movie about compromise, show us the Clinton era, the era of triangulation, the great triumphs of triangulation, NAFTA, overturning Glass-Steagall. These were disasters. That's compromise.
Now, you were an early voice in describing the red state, blue state divisions in the country. Do you have any hope that those divisions are easing, given the results of 2008 and 2012 elections?
No, they aren't easing. What's happened is, look, I think that a lot of this stuff is trumped up in the first place. So I think that the whole situation could change if Democrats had a backbone and were ready to fight for old-fashioned democratic principles. The sort of larger view that I take on this is that the culture wars are fueled by working class anger, expressed in a really peculiar way, an indirect way. It's like almost a sort of Freudian thing. And it would be very easy to put that working class anger back on track and direct it towards the target that it needs to be directed towards. So in that sense, the divisions could ease at any time if Democrats were willing to play, to talk the way they used to in the old days, but they aren't. So will they go on? Well, look, the culture wars were sort of suspended ever since the financial crisis hit and the recession began. And they've been, they've really taken a back seat for the last 4 years now to the economic wars, and I think that's appropriate. But I'm sure they'll be back, and this is going to also, this is going to sound counterintuitive. But one of the reasons that I think they're going to be back is precisely because you think of what you said when you asked the question. I mean, when you think about the demographic changes that have been happening in America and continue to go on, the Republican Party has to come up with a way to rope in all sorts of new people into their coalition. They have to, or they're done for. What are they going to do? It's got to be culture war issues. They've got to come up with a new way of framing culture war issues. The whole genius of the culture wars is that Republicans should have been extinct a long time ago. In fact, were for many years. Sort of ultra-conservative economic orthodoxy was gone in this country until the 1970s, and then it resurfaced, and it resurfaced with the culture wars. Ironically. And the culture wars were the Republican Party's way of reaching out to a demographic that previously had shunned them, working class voters. And they will use the same tools to reach out to other demographic groups. So I think, it's a counterintuitive answer, but I think you will see more culture wars, not less.
Okay. Thomas Frank, columnist at Harper's Magazine, author of a book called Pity the Billionaire, The Hard Time Swindle, and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. Also author of the books What's the Matter with Kansas and The Wrecking Crew, How Conservatives Rule. Tom Frank, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sure thing.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Former Congressman Tom Perriello's view of bipartisanship is that he believes some Tea Partiers may actually want to improve things in society, and that the gridlock on Capitol Hill may be easing up. That's coming up in just a minute. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Well, there you have it. The Republican Party is, quote, narrow-minded and out of touch. A party of, quote, stuffy old men. That's not the pronouncement of a Democrat, but the official conclusion of the Republican Party itself, as detailed in a 100-page audit commissioned by the party's national chairman, Reince Priebus. Authored by a panel of 5 diehard GOP notables, the report concedes that public perception of the party is at record lows, noting with a palpable grimace the devastating attitude of one particularly important constituency. Young voters are increasingly rolling their eyes at what the party represents. Ouch! Having sized up the problem precisely, the Republican hierarchy then stepped forward with the kind of bold and inventive solution that we would expect from such leaders. Better PR. Our policies are sound, declared Priebus, but the way we communicate can be a real problem. Thus, the Repubs announced that they will launch a $10 million program to market the GOP brand to women, Latinos, young people, and others. Oh, they also intend to hire a chief technology officer to improve the party's social media outreach. Priebus described these moves as unprecedented in scope and ambition. Someone should clue him in to an old piece of country wisdom. You can put earrings on a hog, but it won't hide the ugliness. Bashing gays, immigrants, women, public employees, union members, the poor, the jobless, and more, while hugging banksters and billionaires, is a position problem, not a communication problem. This is Jim Hightower saying, and don't expect them to make any real policy changes. So many party factions denounce the audit as an unholy departure from right-wing doctrine that Priebus disavowed his ties to its conclusions even as he was releasing them. This is not my report, he weaseled.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Tom Perriello served only 1 term in Congress, a progressive representing Charlottesville, Virginia, until the Tea Party wave defeated him. A believer in the idea of conviction politics, he says some members of Congress who came to Washington to destroy government may actually be ready to work with Democrats. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Tom Perriello is president and CEO of Center for American Progress Action Fund and counselor for policy to the Center for American Progress. Prior to joining American Progress, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Central and Southern Virginia. Before entering politics, he worked as a conflict analyst and an advocate on environmental and poverty issues. Tom Perriello, thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
Always nice to talk to you. Some of our listeners may be familiar with Center for American Progress, but what is the action fund that you head, and what are your main goals?
Well, I'm counselor for policy at the Center for American Progress, but we also have an advocacy side of our organization that allows us to be a little more direct on some of the policy issues of the day. And I'm the president and CEO. The piece that people are most likely to know is our blog, thinkprogress.org. That's actually one of the most influential blogs in the country. We have about 5 million unique readers every month and 50, 60 posts a day. So we cover really holding the media accountable, holding elected officials accountable on issues that are important to progressives. And so hopefully people are regular readers of Think Progress and the work that we put out there. So Center for American Progress Action Fund, or CAP Action as we're sometimes called, is out there trying to advance issues of equality and fairness across the country.
Okay. Now, you served 1 term in Congress, losing your seat in the Tea Party uprising of 2010. When you ran and when you served, you said you were acting out of conviction politics, regardless of the likely outcome. Isn't that what the Tea Party members do, and doesn't it make compromise pretty difficult?
No, I think conviction can be combined with deliberation, but it means you start out with your deepest principles. You have the deliberative spirit to try to understand the truth claim from the other side, what it is that's motivating them, where you may actually come from the same value system but have different applications and can try of that and can try to build from there. So I think it's actually often people who have deep conviction that are able to support a compromise because people who share that conviction understand that they did everything in their power to represent that point of view and got the best deal available, given the political realities and economic realities of the time. So I think it's actually quite important to distinguish conviction from without deliberation versus conviction with deliberation. But I will also say that there are people in the Tea Party that I respect, even though we don't see eye to eye. I think when people care deeply about issues and are willing to come out and engage in the public sphere and spend their time and often their resources to do so, that's part of what the democratic process is about and a good thing. Just hopefully that's something that's combined with, with a spirit of wanting to solve problems at the end of the day. And that, in fact, can be one of the biggest convictions of all, is the desire to actually make people's lives a little better and to make sure we're living up to that promise of social mobility in the American dream, that every kid in this country is going to have a chance to live out their full potential. So, I really think that can be an important part of getting things done. And, I think that's why something like, just to jump into the news for a second, people were so surprised by Jeb Bush's approach recently of changing his position on immigration. I think what we've seen with Mitt Romney and McCain at points is Not that a base expects you to change a core position you have, because people often don't even really believe that you then hold that new view. They want to hear where you stand and then decide whether or not they agree with the agenda that's put out there.
We're speaking with Tom Perriello, President and CEO of Center for American Progress Action Fund. Is there any way out of the gridlock and dysfunction that is paralyzing Congress right now?
You know, I think there is. I mean, frankly, it's as easy as everyone getting together and actually doing their basic jobs. But in terms of how likely that is to happen, there have been some indications here in the last couple of weeks that there may be a slight breaking in the dam, which is probably the wrong metaphor to use in this case, but some signs that thawing of the ice, that's what I should have used, that people want to come together. And I think just in the last couple of days we've heard, oh, isn't this great that President Obama is finally reaching out to people on the Hill and inviting them to dinner. The reality is he's been doing that for a long, long time. They haven't been accepting, and that's because I think the political calculation has changed. I think for Republicans and even some Democrats on the Hill, it's no longer enough to just be against President Obama, to just be against his agenda, to just be against whatever budget deal is on the table. I think they've realized that everybody's looking bad from that. You have a lot of folks who are going to be up on the Democratic side and the Republican side in 2014, and I think they realize that when they go home, people are getting upset that we're lurching from crisis to crisis. So I think the political winds have changed in a way that give both sides some incentive to actually get something done they can tell their constituents about.
Now, last November, obviously, President Obama won election by a substantial margin. Then he faced down the Republicans on the fiscal cliff. And then in March, he gives up on the sequester. I mean, what's going on? Was he just plain old politically outsmarted, or?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by gave up on the sequester. The sequester was something that happened, that was written into law to happen automatically. What Congress failed to deliver was a deal to overcome the sequester, and ultimately, budget-oriented bills have to start in Congress and have to start in the House, and so that's not really in the president's hands. Frankly, I would have liked to see a different outcome from the fiscal cliff. I think that was the moment to try to come together for either a grand bargain or something that at least moved the debt ceiling and other crises off a year or two, so some of the private capital and other things could start to move in the economy that we desperately need. And I think the problem has been, quite frankly, that despite some of the political winds that have changed and the election outcomes, you really haven't seen a change in attitude for the most part from Republican leadership on the Hill. Just this week we're seeing filibustering of judges that really nobody has any particular objection to. They're incredibly competent and qualified. So even on the basic functions of trying to get nominees through so that we can do the basic work of governance, you're still seeing an attitude of saying block, 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 block. And I think people are starting to understand there's been some serious drag on economic growth based on that strategy.
They lost the election. Why? What's not clear to Republicans? I mean, why aren't they willing to bargain a little bit? I mean, and I guess maybe he maybe saying the president gave up on the sequester. Maybe he's just tired of offering that olive branch and everybody just turning his back on him.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it is important to look at the election results. And one of the things that our organization, both Center for American Progress and Think Progress, looked at was the fact that Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives got 2 million more votes than Republican candidates for the House of Representatives. In other words, the House majority does not actually represent the will of the people. It represents the gerrymandered maps that exist. And I think from that you can go backwards and see what much of the problem is, which is that the incentives right now for House Republicans, I believe, do not line up with the incentives positions of the majority of Americans, or even with the national interest of the Republican Party, which is interested in trying to become a national party again and less of this regional and aging party. But that's not the interest of the majority that John Boehner has in the House. Just from a political reality standpoint, and issues like immigration reform, issues like a balanced approach to solving the budget crisis are things that most Americans want to see, and the president's been out making the case, But it's not necessarily true that it's something that a majority of the constituents in the majority of Republican House members' districts want to see. And so you see a disconnect of incentives, and I think that's where, first of all, we need to look at some democracy reforms related to how we fund elections, basic voting rights, and gerrymandering. But we also, in the short term, need statesmanship, where you do have some folks who say, okay, this is ridiculous for the interest of the country. We cannot be going every 6 weeks into a new budget crisis like this. Let's go ahead and get a deal and move forward. And frankly, as much as I've been for let's do something grand that really, resets the economy and some of the budget figures and deficit figures, I think at this point the more courageous thing may be to think small, to just be willing to say, you know what, we had this theory, which was if we just put an economic gun to our head, we can get this done. So we've got to create a crisis to force us to be responsible, and that used to be a good strategy. The problem is it's just failed. It doesn't mean that Congress finally got to work and did its job. It just meant that they pushed things off to a new crisis. So I think we need a new strategy and say, okay, this idea that extending 2 months or 3 months is somehow going to produce a good bill has just been proven over the last 2 years not to work. So let's do something that gets us through the next 2 or 3 years so we're not in crisis mode, and then go and do comprehensive tax reform or look at entitlements or these other issues. But this notion that doing it under this kind of urgency is enough to create a good bill has proven not to be true. It's just created a bad economy.
And it goes on and on and on. So why not, as you say, just kind of one bite at a time, take a step forward and see where we are?
That's right. And I think, when you do de-escalate a little bit, this comes back to the conviction point at the beginning, there is actually some room for people to look at some of these larger budget issues and find some ground. One of the things, frankly, that the Republicans could do is actually claim victories that they've already delivered. But I think because their rhetoric has been more focused on how to make President Obama look bad than even make themselves look good, the reality is of the $4 trillion deficit reduction figure that everyone wanted through Simpson-Bowles, we've already reached about 2.7 trillion of that, and only have about 1.3 trillion to go. Not only that, it's been about $3 of spending cuts for every dollar of tax revenue. It's actually about $3.50 of spending cuts. In other words, the Republicans have basically been winning these battles, A, to reduce the size of government, and B, to do it overwhelmingly through spending cuts. But you wouldn't know that from the rhetoric in the media, because I think it's been more important for the Republicans to claim the notion that Obama loves spending and won't cut a dollar than to actually go out and say, hey, we won on some of this. And when you actually just recognize those, and those are just facts on the ground, then you can go in and say, okay, maybe this balanced approach is working. Maybe we just need another cut at it to get us to $4 trillion. That deals with a medium-term issue. And then we can go back and look at this 30, 40-year question about health care costs over time.
All right. Now, Congressman, you're young, accomplished. You're making sense here today. Are you going to run for Congress again or anything else for that matter?
I definitely don't feel called to do that right now, and I think it's something that you got to be all in on when you want to do. And it was an incredible honor to represent the people of the Fifth and to be part of this democratic experiment. That's just an amazing thing. For me, I think part of it has to do with the gerrymandering of districts and the role of money in politics, that I'm excited right now to focus on some of these structural issues that limit our politics and try to change those from the outside, as well as work on the ideas side. Certainly care a great deal about the country and about the Commonwealth of Virginia, and did give a serious thought to running for governor this last year, and felt like it wasn't what I was called to do right now. But I certainly am excited that I've remained engaged, and really am very blessed to have the platform that I do to try to work on these issues I care about.
Is it safe for me to assume that we won't necessarily close the door quite yet then? Can I say that?
We can keep the door open, but I think sometimes in this town we have a notion that ultimately running for office is the end goal and everything else is a warm-up to that. And I actually think with the limited amount we sometimes see accomplished from our elected officials, that there are a lot of ways to serve and change. So to me, it's not an on and off thing. It's a continuum of ways to serve I don't often agree with Jim DeMint very often, but when he was leaving the Senate and said, I feel like I can do more running the Heritage Foundation than sitting in the Senate right now, I think reflects many of our observations about the process right now, that that there are a lot of different ways to try to shape public debate and public policy. And for me, I'm excited to be where I am.
Well, very well said. And Tom Perriello is President and CEO of Center for American Progress Action Fund and Counselor for Policy to the Center for American Progress. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect Stand Up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Senator Tom Harkin, a tireless battler for working Americans and especially minimum wage workers.
We are progressive talk radio, and there's no greater progressive in the United States Senate than our guest this morning, Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa, and a good friend and very generous of your time to come into the studio with us this morning, Senator. Good to see you.
It's good to see you, Bill. Thanks for having me back.
And you join our entire team here, Peter and Dan, Phil, yes, and Cyprian over there. And just a good little, before the president flew off yesterday to the Middle East Center, it was a 2-day late celebration of St. Patrick's Day. I noticed you wore your green tie. You're still celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. I started early and I quit late. Celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
It's
a good celebration.
Well, it's St. Patrick's Week, I think, is what it is, right? But he had a little sort of a blessing for the Irish yesterday, which I had not heard before. Here's the president at the reception last night at the White House.
There's an old Irish saying that the recipe for a long life is to leave the table hungry, leave the bed sleepy, leave the bar thirsty. We'll see if that works tonight. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
I was there for that last night.
Oh, were you really?
Oh, it was a great gathering. I took a distant relative of mine, a woman by the name of Marion Harkin. She's from Sligo in Ireland, and she's a member. She's a member of the European Parliament.
Get out, really?
Yeah, sure. So I took her
Cousin Mary.
Cousin Marion. Marion. That's right.
Wow. Oh, neat. I'll bet that was a fun party.
It's always fun.
And the president, of course, does have some Irish roots, right?
That's exactly right. He sure does. He absolutely does on his mother's side. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, Senator, a lot going on this morning. I want to talk to you about one issue. This sort of combines two issues. I want to start with gun safety and with the filibuster. Yesterday, I was disappointed that Majority Leader Harry Reid announced that when the gun safety bill comes to the floor of the Senate, it will not include an assault weapons ban, because he said that Senator Feinstein doesn't have enough votes to get over the filibuster. Republican that he needs 60 votes. Yes. Well, if we had reformed the filibuster the way you wanted to, Senator, right, we wouldn't have that problem.
Right on, Bill. I mean,
so it's sort of a double whammy to me, right?
We're still suffering under this heavy weight of this filibuster, which is archaic, ancient, is not in the Constitution of the United States, thwarts the public will, and has been used for the last 150 years to stop progressive legislation more than anything else. So, but that's the rules. I did see, however, that now there may be a reason for Harry Reid doing it that way to get the bill up. I just see in the Times this morning he said that we would allow that as an amendment,
right? Which
is fine. I mean, fine, we can have an amendment on it. He says, well, if it was in the bill, he would never be able to bring it on the floor. So look, let's win the amendment. Let's see if the Republicans want to step up and still say no. You ought to people ought to have military type weapons in their neighborhoods. There's no reason for it, none whatsoever.
At some point, would you agree it's important to have a vote on that? And that's, by the way, all the president has asked for is, we may not win it, but at least let's have a vote so that the American people know who's with them and who's against them on this issue, right?
I think yes, absolutely, Bill. I think because as you know, we had a assault weapons ban for 10 years,
right?
And then it went off. And Senator Feinstein from California has been the lead on this, trying to get it back in. I think it's vitally important that we have a vote on it, or at least bring it up, and let's see if the Republicans filibuster that. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. See if they filibuster that amendment. That will be kind of telling, also.
Can you filibuster an amendment on the floor?
Sure, you can. Filibuster anything on the floor now, Bill. That's what we got to get rid of, is that stupid filibuster.
What is it going to take, for enough senators to realize that this is not the way to run a railroad?
I tell a little story out of school. Last August, I was with President Obama in Iowa. I flew out in a plane with him, and I said to him, after this election, I said, I hope you get reelected, obviously. I said, if you do, I said, if we don't change the filibuster rule, I said, you might as well take a 4-year vacation. And I told him that again when he was in Iowa just right the night before the election. He made that big appearance in Des Moines. I said, remember, we got to get the filibuster. He said, I know, filibuster. But, well, we just never really did anything about it. And it's going to, again, frustrate us in the future. Last time we talked, Senator, we talked about the minimum wage. We talked right after the State of the Union. You were disappointed. The president said, I want to raise the minimum wage to $9. Not enough, is it? Not enough. But we've worked it out. What should it be? Well, what it really should be is if we'd kept pace with inflation since 1968, the minimum wage today would be $10.56 an hour. It's now $7.25. That's how far off we are. We are. Yeah. So what my bill does that I've introduced is, and with George Miller from California, Congressman Miller, is to raise it to $10.10 by 2016, and then index it after that. We also, Bill, for the first time in 20 years, raised the minimum wage for what we call tipped workers, restaurant workers, people who get tips. They haven't had an increase in their minimum wage in 20 years. So what we do is we raise that. They're not at $7.25? No. I think they're $2 and something like that. Minimum wage. Wow. For tipped workers. Because they assume that they're going to get all the tips that are going to make up for it. That's exactly right. And it's just a shame. So what we do is we raise it to 75% of the minimum wage. So if we're 10.10, then they'll be at around $7 and something cents for tipped employees. But it's just a shame where they're kept. Now, Obama said $9 an hour, but he wanted to end his at 2015. In 2015, our bill, as we stage it over 3 years, would be at $9.15 an hour. So it would be pretty close to what Obama said, except we take it one more year, get it to 10.10, and then index it, and the administration is on board with that. Really? Oh, that's good. That's good. So when you index it, does that mean that we won't have this ongoing battle about the minimum wage? Yeah, because as you know, what happens in the past, we set the minimum wage, and then we don't do anything for several years, and it loses its purchasing power. Then we have to bump it back up again. And I had a hearing on this this last week, and we had small businesses in that said they would like to see indexing because then they would know every year what they have to plan for. And 2% a year or 2.5%, they can handle that. What about we hear every time this issue comes up? Yeah, but if you raise the minimum wage, it's going to cost jobs, right? There'll be fewer people be able to work because employers will have to fire people. Blah 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 blah. I heard John Boehner talking about that. Yeah, I did too. Yeah. I said, show me the proof. Don't give me your that verbiage, that rhetoric. There is absolutely no empirical data to show that. In fact, just the opposite. A long-time study was done, actually in Oregon, and what they took was a county in Oregon that bordered a county in Washington State, a county in Oregon that bordered one in Idaho, counties that bordered California. And they looked over the years what happened when Oregon raised the minimum wage and the other states didn't. Was there a fleeing of jobs back in? No, absolutely none whatsoever. In fact, most of the data shows that there's an increase in employment. Now, you might say, how does that happen? Well, Bill, look at it. When you increase the minimum wage, then people at the bottom, they have more spending money. Now, they're not going to the Cayman Islands to spend their money. They're
right.
spending it locally on their local restaurants, on their local shops and stuff like that. So it does increase the economic activity in local areas.
Yeah, they're going to the Walmart or the 7-Eleven and they're spending their money, creating more demand, which means, Well, so your legislation is moving, or is
I'm going to move it. It's going to be in my committee. I'm going to report it out sometime soon. We'll have it out there, and we're looking for either having it on the floor of the Senate by itself, or we're going to attach it to something as we go through. But I am committed, before I leave here next year, to getting this increase in the minimum wage and getting it indexed for once and for all.
That'll be a nice legacy to leave.
I'm going to get it. I'm going to get her that.
Many other great things. We saw in the month of February pretty good numbers for job creation, 235,000. And some good news is manufacturing sector starting to show some improvement. That's an area that you I know have been working a lot on and are also, I guess, introducing some legislation in that area.
I have a bill in already on rebuilding the manufacturing sector of America.
We've lost the manufacturing base in this country.
Oh, my gosh, it's been awful. I just saw a figure the other day, Bill, that during the Great Depression, we lost 31 million manufacturing jobs, but then we rebuilt it back after that. During the last decade, we've lost 33 million, just in the last decade.
Wow.
Prior to the last decade, we had 20 million manufacturing jobs. We're now down to less than 12 million. More than 20% of our jobs were manufacturing, non-farm jobs. Now it's down to about 11%. I can tell you, in my state of Iowa, just in the last decade, we've lost 48,000 manufacturing jobs in the state of Iowa. Now, we got to get this back up again, Bill. I mean, because, there's a big ripple effect. For every manufacturing job, you get maybe 2 to 3 supporting kind of jobs. So we got to get back to making things in America and rebuilding this manufacturing sector. And so that's what my bill does. It basically says that the president, every 2 years, has to submit to Congress sort of what sectors, what technologies are out there that we can take advantage of. How does that compare with other countries and what they're doing? And then recommending actions that we should take. And to review all the different things. Review tax policies, review regulations, review everything. What can we do to help get manufacturing back up in America?
Is it particular? I mean, I don't know. I was just trying to think while you were speaking about what we make still in this country. I mean, we still make cars, and damn good cars, and better cars, by the way, because of the bailout of the auto industry and some of the restrictions that were put on that money.
That's right.
But, we don't make iPhones. I guess we're starting...
Some Apple products,
some
laptops.
Apple this year, maybe.
Yeah, we'll start to... Or iMacs, we're going to start making some here,
But for the iPhone, no. The iPads, no. Televisions, no, right? VCRs, if they still make them? No. I mean, what are we making here besides cars? Not much.
Not much. And we got to get back to making more equipment, more things that we can make in this country. I just met with some people from New Balance, the shoes.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They're all made here in America.
Is that right?
Yes, New Balance is made in America, and they employ people in America, and they pay them well, and they have retirement policies. So things can be made here as long as you've got conscientious, good people running these businesses willing to share the profits with the workers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly have the workers. We've got the workforce. We've got the resources. We have the know-how. We have the skills. There's no reason not to manage.
And with new immigration, with all these new people coming into America, Bill, this is a new workforce for manufacturing.
Made in the USA. Nothing better than that. Senator Tom Harkin here. You don't often get a chance to throw a question or a comment to a United States Senator. This is your opportunity. 866-55-PRESS is the toll-free number. We'll be right back here.
This is the Bill Press Show, live on your radio and current TV.
24 minutes after the hour, the millennial generation, our next segment of the Full Court Press. We're passing the torch, Senator, to the next generation here. On your comments about manufacturing, or the assault weapons ban. Peter's been following the social media. Couple of quick comments.
Yeah, we're tweeting at BP Show in the spirit of the St. Patrick's Day celebration. Irish Boy writes in, says, lost manufacturing jobs because of global trade. Labor is cheaper overseas, and corporations love cheap labor. And our friend Astasia says, you don't have to be from Iowa to totally love Senator Tom Harkin. Love how hard he's worked with Senator Udall and Senator Merkley. So there you go. Getting some love on Twitter. You can find us at BP Show.
Particularly with the two of those on the filibuster, issue, right. For sure. Yeah. Senator, before we get back to some of these issues of the day and our callers, say it ain't so. I mean, this is you've announced that you're going to hang it up there, right?
Yes, I did, Bill. I announced that I will not seek re-election to a sixth term. Come on, give me a break. I've had 40 years here. Okay. And,
no, I know.
But I love my job. I love the Senate and everything. But it's time to step aside and let this new generation come. And I'm very encouraged that. Do
you have a good a slate of people? I mean, we need somebody who can come as close to Tom Harkin as we can to step in there.
Well, I don't want to say I'm cloning myself or anything like that, but there is a young congressman from Iowa by the name of Bruce Braley, who is a great progressive.
Heard good things about him.
He's really a good guy. He's out there putting everything together. He hasn't formally announced yet, but he's getting a lot of endorsements, and there's a lot of excitement about him. And I assume that sometime soon he's going to be announcing, but keep your eye on him. He's very good.
Well, we'll have to get him in and give him some help, too.
He's very good. He is really a good progressive.
Let's say hello to Dawn, calling from Chicago. Hey, Dawn, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you have to say? What's your comment?
I wanted to ask the senator, what is it that I can do to help get manufacturing back in the U.S.? What can I do? What can I tell my friends to do?
All right, good question, Don. Good. You've got your bill in there, Senator.
Sure. Go on my website, just harkin.senate.gov, and you can look up the bill. It's a very simple, straightforward bill. But we, as Bill Preston and I were just talking here off there about, we need a manufacturing strategy in this country. Every other country has one. We don't have one. And so if we can get something like this legislation through, then we can start to lay down sort of comparative. How are we comparing to other countries? What are our tax laws? What kind of keeps manufacturing from growing? There's a lot of things we can do. For example, just close one tax loophole. That tax loophole.
We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.
On so many issues, it's hard to keep track of all you're doing. But I do want to ask you about Social Security because, I mean, it's under attack. Let's face it. The other side would love to get rid of it. Can protect it and save the benefits?
Bill, they've been after Social Security since we brought it in the 30s. That right wing has always been after it. They want to privatize it, George Bush, partially privatize it, everything. They just can't get over the fact that it's the most successful anti-poverty program beneficial to the elderly that we've ever had, and it's working well. Anytime you hear somebody say, well, we got to cut entitlements, we got to cut Social Security to save it, don't believe it. Yeah. There are other ways of saving Social Security. For example,
we'll have to leave it right at that, Senator.
Okay.
Get you back and tell us all those ways. On manufacturing, on the assault weapons, on the minimum wage, on Social Security. Thank you, Tom Harkin.
Thanks, Bill Brett.
Thanks for coming in.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Thomas Frank, Tom Perriello, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy.